Welcome to Leadership Matters, a podcast from the Bailey Group. I'm your host, Kaylee Thomsen, president of and partner at the Bailey Group, where we believe better leaders create healthier workplace environments, healthier humans, and a better world. On this show, we explore real stories, practical insights, and honest conversations to help you lead yourself and others better. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Leadership Matters. I'm your host, Kaylee Thomsen, and today I'm joined by Dr. Tonya Jackman Hampton. Tonya is an organizational transformation expert and a passionate keynote speaker and author of The Myth of the Fearless Leader. Tonya, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I am super excited to have you here. And one of the reasons of many is your interest and research and experience with this concept of fear. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, what led you to eventually writing The Myth of the Fearless Leader.
Yeah. Well, it certainly has been a journey and it continues. I will say that, through the course of writing the book that you alluded to, it was a discovery early that I had in my learning where fear existed. And however, I wouldn't have necessarily named it that at that time. And it was when I was in high school. I grew up in a suburban high school, and the majority of the population of the high school, from a racial context perspective, there was probably about a dozen individuals of color and maybe about 4 or 5 Black individuals. And so in my quest of wanting to be a part of that community, I really tried to identify corners and people and persons that I could be a part of, and didn't always feel like I belonged. And so my attempt at being a part of those communities was not always, quite frankly, positive, because sometimes as kids or as individuals, we revert to poor behavior in order to gain attention. And so in my quest, luckily, it wasn't where I had challenges in school where I didn't succeed and finish high school. But certainly in terms of my interactions with other people, I vied for different relationships in a way that was trying to either, support them sometimes from being sort of the protector, right? So if someone else was bullying them, I was the one that was protecting that person, or I might have started to create actions that could have been or were bullying in order to ensure that I was creating a wall around the individuals that I, sort of felt favored to, or in order to build a pathway of connection, no matter what that was, in order to be accepted and be a part of that community. And so it was all predicated on me feeling like I was alone, and that was scary. And so it kind of goes with the notion of us hearing or believing that we don't need to be liked. But the reality is we all like to be liked.
Absolutely.
We like to belong. We like to be loved. We're nurtured at home. We are nurtured from birth, hopefully. And so the way that people embrace you becomes a very important factor in how we grow up as humans that can be productive or have, successful or what might be perceived as successful outcomes. And so that's where the fear existed, is early in high school. And it was the formative years of my life. Now, when I think about years before that, it wasn't so much so. I had a story that was told to me and a memory of me standing on a tomb of a vacuum cleaner. And that was my first stage. That's what I loved to do, is I would stand on that vacuum cleaner and speak into it. And so that became a memory that I hold. And that was as early as like 6 or 7, right? Wow. And then I will say, however, that another fear that I had that I reflected on during my writing course was I didn't like grass. And so grass was this prickly thing that I didn't enjoy. And my mother would put me in the grass, not on purpose, but because right, like you needed to. She couldn't hold me all the time. And I would literally start crying. And so then it became fun for my siblings. They would put me in the grass just to watch me, just to watch me react. But I overcame grass, obviously, the fear of it, and was able to, at some point in life, I can't exactly remember the first time after those fears that I sat in it, but I can sit in it and enjoy it now. And so something along that path helped me to get to that point, and that's what I wanted to understand as well when I was in the writing process. And so I guess the moral of the story and the fear and knowing where it is taking time to reflect on it and understand the root. And there's research behind our ability to move our muscle to that memory and shift the brain away from the amygdala so that we are actually more thinking about things through our executive thinking. Yeah.
How aware were you at the time, say in your high school years, of that fear being present, Tonya?
I was not at all aware. I mean, I actually felt oddly very confident in wanting to be a part of something and in creating allegiances with other people. And so and then too, some of the it feels odd to call it backlash because in some cases I might have started the action, although one negative behavior should not mean that another negative behavior should come at you. But what I would say is that some of the backlash, what I knew was negative, right? And so I felt at the time that I was merely trying to establish my own presence and support other people around me so that they too had presence and meaning and could feel like they were a part of a community. Yeah. So I felt like I was doing, in some cases, the right thing. And, this was not 80% of my life. It actually was more or less 20% if we were to equate things. But it's significant enough in that in the brain, we collect trauma or we collect things that don't make us feel good. And so I have more memories around that than some of the positive things that I know went on because here I am today that, it didn't hinge on me so much or anchor me in that that continued to be the only thing I did.
When did you start to recognize some of this presence of fear in your own life as you're navigating things?
The most significant thing that sticks out for me that is a repeated pattern is loss. And I'm glad you're asking the question because I tell the story in the book about losing someone who was very close to me at a very young age. And not by death, but because this person was going through her own struggles. She left the home. And so I was distraught about that. And I can remember in the process reading letters that she left behind in the neighborhood. So it wasn't at home where those messages were left, but I was, traveling around in the neighborhood doing my hangout thing and finding the letters. And so I, at a very, this was I was about 8 or 9-ish. It might have been slightly younger than that. Sometimes I have to think about, okay, what house did I live in?
Sure.
When did we shift?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was about 8 or 9, somewhere in that range. And I just associated that departure with losing someone. And then even before that, though, my grandfather passed away, and my grandmother, and so I think I lost my grandfather when I was 5, something like that, and I lost my great grandmother, not my grandmother, my great grandmother, when I was like 8 or 9. Those associations of losing someone, whether it was by they departed from the earth or they, decided to leave a unit, created worries and doubts and concern. And so that I'd say that's the first time, and those stories come up in my book. And now when I have lost someone, I've built up a muscle over time. And I've got stories that I can certainly share along the way here that illustrate or demonstrate how there's been growth. The more I got acquainted with the existence of that fear, where it was coming from, what it was associated with, meaning what was the early on memory that created that energy for me, and what did I do in that situation, and how could I learn from that, whether that what I did in that past was something that was a good lesson or a not so good lesson. You can learn either way, right? And so taking habits from or reverting your habits, changing your habits from what you've done in the past is helpful too.
Mm.
Yeah.
One of the things I really appreciate about your work is it really pushes against this fight, flight, or freeze response and gives us another model
Yes.
to engage, explore, and execute. Can you walk us through that model?
You know, I have to give credit to the people that I've interviewed along the way, the people I've had conversations with. In fact, today I had an executive coaching session with one of my clients, and she's been, as a part of the work that I do with clients, she's been using my book, and we've been talking about how she's been engaging and exploring and executing. And the Engage, Explore, Execute is really a new path towards helping our brain operate in a different way. It's not going to change how we necessarily function around fear, because the fight, flight, and freeze path is an automatic operation that our amygdala loves. And so it likes to say, you know what, I see something and it doesn't make me feel safe. And I have this sense of psychological safety that comes up that says I feel insecure when I see a decision I need to make, or when I see a pathway that I'm not sure if I should go down or not, if I see a person that I should connect to or not. It's operating all the time, and it loves to decide whether or not we feel safe. And so it's the engage part that's going to help you to shift. If you also, however, pause once you have understood that you have fear.
Mm.
And so engage is teaching people how to name that fear. And there's research and studies really generated by Matthew Lieberman, who said if we can repeat the idea of naming and recognizing a fear, we are building up a mechanism in our brain to move away from fight, flight, or freeze and go into another direction. You maybe have heard about the gratitude research. And so the more we can think about things that we're grateful for, we are actually changing the functioning and the pictorial, if you will, of our brains. So there's science that shows that the brain looks this way. It's a very small p when the amygdala is high, or you can build out the other side of your brain, the executive functioning, by thinking more in positive gratitude type ways. And you start to build out the strength in your executive functioning, and your pattern goes a different way. And so our brains, we like patterns, we like habits, and that's where we pull information from, because we say, oh, I've been there before. Or the brain does, I've been there before, so I'm going to do this. And what I'm asking, and or other researchers have asked people to do, is to think about, sure, you've done that before, but did you do everything the way that you could have done? And is there another way to do it? And so when you start thinking about other ways to do things, or what you did do, and affirming whether or not that is right or wrong, you're then moving into the explore phase.
Sure.
And you're starting to understand that there are different ways at which you can make a decision, and you don't have to just do the automatic pilot that you otherwise might have done, or the fast thinking, right?
Yep.
And we do that fast thinking because we need to, right? Like, we need to be able to make quick decisions, but we also have to remember to take about a 60-minute pause and decide within that pause, what other information can we gain? What anxiety, worries, and doubts can we settle down so that we can get out of that reptile thinking and move more forward towards our frontal cortex, our cortex. And so once we've collected some of that past history in the reflection mode, I also encourage, and this isn't so much of the research that I'm talking about from Matthew Lieberman, but more or less, how can we think about the different people in our lives that we can have conversations with, and build what is characterized sometimes by others as a board of directors or a kitchen cabinet, And this goes back to the history of we are products of our own environment. How do we surround ourselves with people that will give us really critical feedback, whether it's positive or opportunity focused, and learn from them? So I often talk about who are your leaders in your life. And the very first leader in my life was my mother, right? And so I learned from mom how to deal with uncertainty, but still do it, right? So I'm thinking that your mom or whomever raised you helped you to do the same thing because we assumed that they just got this, right? I have my own kids, and I thought, oh my gosh, my mom didn't tell me all these things. Well, it's because she didn't know, but she still raised me, and she did a darn good job, I'll have to say. And I give that credit to her more or less, and my father. And then, of course, the people along the way. And so, in fact, I saw one of my mentors yesterday, and he didn't know I considered him a mentor. I pointed it out to him. He was in my acknowledgments. And he's like, I didn't know I was named. Yes, you were named. We just have to think about who are the people that surround you. Learn from them. What are their lessons? How do they model certain things that you want to do or that you're up against? And try it out, and see how you can be successful. And if you're not, it's not like you're broken. I think we've heard before where perfection, right? We shouldn't be trying to strive for that. I say that. And instead think about how you can be excellent. And the only way you can be excellent is to learn from your lessons in the past, learn from other people, and continue to build on it. Try not to repeat mistakes. And so the other thing I'll say or end with is those lessons that we're collecting and the information that we're getting from other people is starting to create our list for, kind of a tactical sense. But at the same token, a list helps to create a plan and a strategy. And so once we have that list, we can start to think about what is that plan and what is that strategy and execute. And so I'm trying to teach people how to go down the engage, explore, execute path so that once they have that fear and they recognize that they go that way rather than the fight, flight, or freeze mode. Because so often fight, flight, or freeze, quite honestly, can get us in a place where we make poor decisions. We have poor outcomes. We have fallout. We have situations where people are harmed. And we also have situations where people unfortunately die. And so we want to have more executive thinking so that we can minimize the challenges that are going on in the world.
That was so powerful.
Yeah.
Can you give an example of how you personally have used your engage, explore, execute framework as it handles one of your fears, whether it be loss or probably not tomatoes, but maybe tomatoes?
Yes, you can bring it. That's a great one. So, and I'll tell another one too, but that gives an understanding. You've read the book, so that's great. So yeah, tomatoes I didn't bring up earlier, but that was one of the easier fears that I had, and I still work on it. In fact, I was eating a salad. Was it yesterday? It might have been yesterday, and no, it was the day before yesterday. It was a Caesar salad. It had little tiny cuts of diced tomatoes in there.
Those are hard to pick out.
Right. Like I really wanted to pick them out because they weren't, going down throat still the way that I felt that they should. And so I did have that thought, but I ate them. I probably ate around some of them, right? Because they were nicely diced in the entire salad. I'm doing better with smaller, tiny tomatoes. I still will never get to the level of biting into a tomato like it's an apple. I just won't. My mom could do that. And my dad would always tease and said, I don't understand how you don't like tomatoes because you eat ketchup. And that actually stayed with me. And that got me to a place of trying it out.
So that helped you explore a little bit.
Yeah. To be open to, okay, all right, well, there's something in that message.
Yep.
And he can eat them. He's right. He eats ketchup and tomatoes.
Yep.
So, okay, right. Got it. I'll pay attention to that leader in my life. So that's a simple one. But the one that really, I think is significant for me, I didn't actually know that I was utilizing the engage, explore, execute. At the time, it became a hindsight after the book was written. And as I was connecting the dots to my work in healthcare to my own health. And so when I was writing my book, finally, because there's the dissertation, which was about 10 years ago. And then, 10 years fast forward, I started to write the book. And in 2018, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so on August 3rd, I got a call. I was sitting in my daughter's room and learned from my nurse practitioner that I had signs of breast cancer as a result of doing my annual mammogram. So I was religious. In fact, I would call my mom every time I would go up to my appointment. Now this
Oh.
is 10 years in, right? Because I was, about almost, oh my gosh, dare I say 10 years ago. But at any rate, had been going for quite some time, and I'm a few decades old. And so I got the information from my nurse practitioner and was stunned. Thought, how could this happen in a year?
Mhm.
And I've been religious. I've been going all the time, and frankly, I'm not overly healthy, but I run. I
Yeah.
eat relatively okay. I do like my chocolate chip cookies, but I was just shocked, and I thought, how could this happen? And so I went in because I was informed I had to go do a biopsy, and after the biopsy, it was affirmed that I had breast cancer in both breasts, and it was like somebody had taken a salt shaker and shook it across my body, and I didn't know what to do with that immediately, and so I, however, made some pretty quick decisions. And I think as a result of, one certainly factor is the resources and people that I knew. They helped me. So being in the healthcare space helped me to understand where I could navigate, right? Like, so I didn't have specific conversations with people. Matter of fact, the only person that I told outside of my family immediately was my boss and my manager, because I felt like I needed to.
Mhm.
I knew at some point I'd have to take a leave. And my first question to him was, what do I say to people? And he said, you know what? You don't have to say nothing until you're ready. And that alleviated some of my fear. So the first was, knowing where to navigate. I kind of jumped, and this is a good illustration that engage, explore, execute doesn't have to be in an order. It can be certainly sequential, but it doesn't have to be a straight road. And so I was able to think about, through my conversations with him and my conversation with my husband, and then recognizing that this idea of how I could certainly leverage different resources
Mhm.
to build a plan. And so that was my exploration kind of steps. And then I can't say that I necessarily put a name or said, where's this fear and worry coming from, other than the fact I was just diagnosed. Like that was the way of naming it.
Mhm.
And then in October, I did my first surgery. So it was October 25th-ish. I got called on August 3rd, so almost 2 months later. And I think that was pretty rapid. And the surgery was not just a surgery, it was a transformational surgery. I had a double mastectomy. And, I would say that in part what made that decision easy was that I knew that I didn't need to have breasts anymore, right? Like
Mhm.
I immediately said, okay, for me, they are overrated. I'm done, right? But the reality is that there are younger women, or there are women that want to preserve that. So that would not have been a decision for them. I happened to talk to someone a couple years ago who was diagnosed with breast cancer in both breasts, and she was challenged because she wanted to have more children and nurse them. And so I don't know what her decision making, what would have helped her to decide. But through the course of the process, I was able to leverage different components of the Explore, meaning resources, people. I like I said, the naming of the fear was probably associated with more or less the diagnosis. I was able to say, I'm afraid because I have the diagnosis. And then I just started to build out a plan in partnership with my healthcare providers. So I had a great team, which was wonderful. I also had some women in my family that I could lean on. Actually, I am being remiss, because one of the things I talk about in the book that was harder than breast cancer, and I talk about mom a lot because she means a lot to me. And the hardest thing was having breast cancer and her not being here, right? and not being able to have the conversation with her. But what was, at least to some subpar level, better is I had other women in my life that I could have dialogue with who showed up with me at my appointments. I'm going to see my aunt this afternoon. She's one of the aunts that went with me, and begin to work on my plan, which got me into the execution phase. And so then, fast forward a year later, I'm through all my surgeries. I'm done with breast cancer, thank goodness. And I am coming up on a 7-year survivor level. And so I would say that that's the biggest learning or most significant memory that I have around when did engage, explore, and execute come to fruition for me. And what's so beautiful about that is that I then began to see how I could connect it to other healthcare environments and share it with patients. So last year, worked with a healthcare system to create a breast cancer event where we would have dialogue with breast cancer patients, tie them with coaches, if you will, and have table discussion about what are their fears, how do they respond to their fears, and what is their relationship with fear. Those questions are very intentional. It's embedded in the research that I've done, and it created a process for them to be able to walk through their own breast cancer journey. And so I, through that work, am confident or feel good that I am, of course, more work has to be done in order to continue to build up that confidence and affirmation that it works. But I'm not just the beta that experienced the engage, explore, execute with their breast cancer. I think that others could benefit from it. I've got stories from patients where they felt really, while on the other side of their breast cancer, like I was when I used it, or even in the pattern of early on, I was able to use it not knowing it. Regardless, they felt that had they had it, awareness of the path, they would have operated better. And so I want to get this at the front end of the diagnosis, right? And ensure that it's a path that can be useful for people on the front end of the diagnosis and even on the back end or whatever else they're experiencing associated with their health, right? So it doesn't have to be just breast cancer, doing this around diabetes or whatever health situation people have. And then also continuing to associate this with being a leader. And I'll end with saying anyone can be a leader. We don't have to have people reporting to us. At the end of the day, we have to figure out how to lead ourselves. And what I'm asking people to do is some of the things that we've heard in the past before of know yourself, no fear. Not N-O fear, but K-N-O-W fear, right? So that you can begin to engage and explore and get to an execution plan. Yeah.
That really provides people a lot of agency.
Yeah.
How would you describe your relationship with fear as it stands today, Tonya?
Oh, I really have to work in certain situations to understand if I am experiencing fear. So early on, before any of this work, although I talk about this in the book, I used to think I was afraid of speaking up. And I learned that it's not about speaking up. It's about waiting to speak up. So I get anxious. That's where the anxious energy is that I don't want to wait to talk. I have something to say, and I hope people listen. But it's recognizing when fear exists and what is it around. That becomes important for me now. And I'd like to say that the reason why I have to work so hard at that is that I've built up the muscle to go down the new path rather than the former path of fight, flight, or freeze. Again, that's evidence, right? That I'm able to shift my brain pretty quickly with the pause and move into the engage, explore, execution mode quicker and avoid or block off, if you will, that other path that I could go on. So sometimes it takes a little bit of a harder, right, thought process to affirm that I'm really having energy around fear. Other times, not so much. I mean, and earlier I talked about fear around loss. And of course, loss hurts. And two, it hurts differently depending upon who it is in our lives. Um, but one of the things I did when Mom passed away is 2 or 3 days before she had passed away. She had not been talking for even 2 or 3 days before that. My aunt, who I'm happening to go see this afternoon, had remembered that one of the things I would do when somebody was sick or something was going not so great in the family is I would sing, I can't sing, Bob Marley's song, Every Little Thing is Gonna Be All Right.
Mm.
And so she, when we were in the hospital with my mom and family, she encouraged me to go up to my mom's bedside and start singing to her. And at first I told her, no, I'm not doing that. And so, because I'm stuck in the grief, I'm already there knowing that Mom was likely going to pass in the next few days. But what my aunt helped me to do, and she, I don't think realizes that, is to step in the place of death and realize that that these things, everything is going to be okay, right? That we don't have to stay stuck in the what am I going to do mode, that there is something on the other side. And all of what's on the other side in this particular case was exactly what she wanted me to do, or even more. And so just get over there. And the way that you can get over there is what I would characterize as our walk-on song, right? Or our lid lifter, or our ability just to reframe and think about something differently from another perspective. It's not pushing it aside, trying to turn something to positive and say, oh, you'll be all right. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, think about something in a different way, different angle, positive angle for the moment, so you can shift. And so that's what I really try to do. And that, again, is an illustration or demonstration of how you can, again, push away or block away the old path. And so what I have to do now is try some new things that scare me so that I can sooner realize that fear.
Sure.
There's work around there. I can't remember the name of the woman, but she did 100 things that, that scared her.
Yeah.
So that she could build up, I'm thinking, a muscle around not being scared anymore.
Yeah.
And so that's what I need to do. I want to surf. I don't know how to swim very well.
Okay.
So I think I need to learn how to do that. And I have to decide, for those of you, I don't mean to scare people, but I don't want to die surfing.
Yeah.
Not at this age. so
That's fair.
I haven't gotten over this hump of not knowing how to swim so well to then go and do it and then to go surf, because I better learn how to swim before I surf. So I might do that. I did say, actually, it's funny, these things are coming up, but I was talking to my sister today. I said, I think I might actually jump out of a plane before I go surf. Because she was saying she would ride a motorcycle. I thought, oh, and she's older than I am. And so I was like, you sure you want to do that? You're like, you're going to wait this long to maybe, have something scary happen? But at any rate, the lesson in that is just try things that you really want to do, because we only have one life. And then the other thing I'll say is fear is always present. I hope the world can think about ways at which we can be fearful, not fearless, fearful and wonderful, right? And the way that we can be fearful and wonderful is to try things out, learn from our lessons, gather people around us for ways at which we can learn as well, and create a path for how we can try what we were afraid of. And then we may not even get on the other side of that and be certain anymore that we're not afraid of it, because I'm still concerned about losing people. But I think about it in a different way, and I can process it over time rather than in kind of deep dives in withdrawal, so to speak. Yeah.
How do you think about it now, Tonya?
Yeah, I think about the loss.
Yeah.
I think about it now as there are two things that are evident in life, that there's change and that there's loss. And there's a book that I read on Buddhism, and that's where I got that from. Don't ask me who the author is. Sorry. But at any rate, that is one way that I affirm or say, you know what, these things happen. It is what it is. But now how can I build up the muscle or the steps for dealing with that situation? Right? How do I prepare myself so that I am able to survive and that I don't get in sort of the reptile brain and feel like I need to protect myself, and not do anything and withdraw and not have meaningful outcomes. That's what can happen when you go down that other path. And so I try to put some ease into my mind immediately. And then, whether or not it's the right thing necessarily, because, it's sort of, for me, humility, what's coming up right now when I say this. And that is, I try to step out and say, what's my role in this? Who is it that's passing, and how can I help whatever in the situation or whomever? And so I shift my responsibility in order to take agency in my own pain or worry or doubt. And so that's another way that I deal with it. And then I have to, have my respites, find my times where I can have my own lone periods and process through my own thoughts. Whether that's just thinking about it and journaling, or, the drive time can be the processing time. The in the shower can be the processing time. It's like we hear practice around journaling. That's not my thing. I mean, like, I do it at the end of the year, or I might do it in celebration of something.
Yeah.
But, I say that to say invite other tools into your life.
Yeah.
And let the tool be your tool. And if it is journaling, great. Because obviously there's research behind journaling and how it helps us to reflect. And there are a multitude of ways of reflecting. And then the number one thing that helps me, quite honestly, is running. That's my form of meditation, and so I'm able to process my thoughts, listen to my breath, breathe in certain ways while I'm doing that. And that's become my ritual. And so that too helps me think about grief or loss differently. Oh, finally, book that I really loved was a book by Marissa Williams, and it's called Grief is Love. And that was one of the most powerful books that I read. Actually, I said finally, and one of the things I want to be intentional about in this conversation is to tie this back to leadership, because, right, the myth of the fearless leader was surrounded around or coming from a number of different leaders that shared what is their story around fear.
Yeah.
And what they did not talk about, and I still believe that the theory is true, that they didn't talk about this because the world does not make it safe to talk about loss. However, they are humans and they experience loss, and they still have to lead. Right? And so we cannot continue to say that we are fearless. People's fear may not be around loss. They do get sad and worried and have doubts. I can't find anybody that necessarily gets happy. Right? And so that's why I say that from on that extreme end, fear exists. And then on the other side, a little thing like a tomato, somewhere, whatever it is that you're not doing, there is fear around that. There's doubt and there's worry around that. And so we've got to stop saying that it's so important to be a fearless leader, because those extremes, whichever continuum, become the stage at which people operate and function from. And those are things that are outside of the work environment most often, although you might eat a tomato while you're working. But there are also work situations, leadership decisions that are in between that spectrum.
Sure.
That we live as individuals. And there are fears associated with that, doubts and worries. And so all I'm trying to say is that on the simplest thing people have, or even the other difficult extreme situation, people have fears, and everything in between. And so acknowledge and accept that we all have fears, and that we have to have a mechanism or a way to manage differently so that we are not always trying to protect ourselves from those situations. And then as a result, when we protect ourselves, we actually might take the safer route, which may not be the best way. And sometimes that safer route is protecting ourselves and sacrificing everybody else. And that's certainly not what we want to do. Those are important factors when we talk about fear and leadership too.
Where do you think this fearless leader persona or messaging originated?
I don't know. I think that we think people can't fail, right? And so the universal fears that are in the book that came from the research there's 16 universal fears that we have. And I summarize them into a framework because every author, every, right, scholar, practitioner has to have a framework.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and also, too, it goes back to our brain can only remember three
Yeah.
things.
Yep.
Now, granted, I brought it down to 4, so you got to remember one more thing. But I did try to find a nice way to characterize it, and that is that we get into a feud with our fears. And so one of the ways that I bucket the 16 is under the fear of failure. And then another set is under the fear of the effect. And then the other set of fears is under the fear of uncertainty. And then under the fear of distrust is the final bucket. And so under each of those hoods, if you will, there's sub fears that connect up to failure, effect, uncertainty, and distrust. And so feud becomes the I think the message that we have heard in the past. In fact, you could probably associate it with it. I never have with the fight, flight, freeze. Now it's fawn. Now it's something else. Flop, I think, is another one. We could probably say feud, but although feud kind of is another acronym for fight. And so what I would say is that it's the stories that we have heard for so long. I talk about in the book that it subconsciously, we don't like to hear noise, for instance. And a noise that I would call out is a baby crying. And I talk about this as well. And when that baby cries, we want to quiet the baby down, especially if you're on a plane.
Oh, yes.
Right? And it's not that we, of course, that makes sense to quiet the baby down, because that's over time what we've learned from baby to, being handed over and also by watching people take care of babies. But what if the baby wanted to cry? We tell our boys the stereotype they hear is big boys don't cry. Well, maybe they should cry. That's part of the naming process.
Yeah.
And so, I haven't gone back to talk to our ancestors, but I appreciate the question. And I'm going to research it and understand, where did that narrative come from?
Yeah.
But it's early, eons back,
Yeah.
centuries in our past of the habits that we've created. Even, I would even say probably bears or reptiles.
Sure.
They protect their young when they have a perception that they are sad. And it's not that we shouldn't. That's not the message I'm trying to create. But I'm saying that we've built that pattern so much up that it's an automatic response. And there might be beauty in a different response around that situation. We might be able to release some trauma in some situations.
Yeah.
We might be able to help people with their mental health in some situations by allowing them to withdraw and creating a supportive environment for them rather than a judging environment.
Yeah.
Right? If a leader cries, they must be weak. I'll end on saying that President Obama, when Osama bin Laden was found, there was a picture in the paper of him and his cabinet sitting at a table being notified that they had found Osama bin Laden. You cannot tell me that there wasn't one leader, at least at that table, who had fears. But they found him and they surrendered him. Now, I'm not bringing up anything political. I'm just stating facts. And so the recognition of fear was in that room. And however, they still devised a plan to get to an outcome that was helpful at that time. Right? And so we have to change the narrative and recognize that it's okay to be fearless or fearful. Did I say that? See, look what happened. It's okay to be fearful. And then build a path, right? Right. Even while it's present. Don't fight or freeze, but identify a new way forward where you can execute, good outcomes. Yeah.
If every leader were to embrace this concept of it's okay to be fearful, what do you think it would unlock for themselves and their teams and the organizations that
I
they
love that
serve?
question. I love that question. I'm glad you asked it. This happens in organizations already where we talk about, not all organizations, but there are organizations that have adopted the practice of what are our hopes and dreams. what are our worries and doubts?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really working through engage. What are our hopes and dreams? What are our worries and doubts? And so all I'm doing is adding, yay, another framework. But it came from research, and I wanted to crystallize the practice that we are doing and try to summarize it for people so that they can have a nomenclature, if you will, around it. So when organizations are able to capture their hopes and dreams, worries and doubts, they start to build out confidence and some resiliency in their organization. When they have those conversations with one another, they start to build trust, because then I can talk about my worries and doubts with other people. And I feel good about that because people are affirming for me that it's okay to have that conversation. And so now I feel like I belong and I'm part of an organization where I'm with a team who's willing to talk not just about the hopes and the dreams, but about the worries and the doubts. And so it increases innovation, it increases creativity, it increases productivity, it increases the ability for people to stay in an organization or not. And that's where the money hits the road. That if I have more people leaving my organization, I might want to look at whether or not I have an environment where people feel like they are psychologically safe. Because, right, and I'm not alone on this journey of understanding the sort of the cost of psychological safety. Amy Edmondson talks about this a lot. And so the idea of creating psychological safety in our work environments helps people to get into environments where they are safe. Our brain is no longer wanting to protect us. We are now wanting to move towards better outcomes, more meaningful outcomes, have more meaningful conversations. Because I'm in an environment where people respect me, I have enjoyment with them, and I'm thriving, and I'm hopefully doing things that I love to do. And so the more organizations can have these conversations, they will start to recognize what are the paths or the steps that they can take to move forward into explore, because now they've got their set of steps. They can prioritize them and create a plan and start to execute it. So they're literally moving through that. And I love to talk about explore or engage, explore, and execute in that way, the way that you're bringing up for organizations, teams, because it's not just a individual system. It's now a organizational system. And this is where I get really happy as an author because I started to realize that it wasn't just a book on the shelf, right? That it wasn't just a learning research that came from many, many leaders, but it also is a system that can create system change, right? And so start to break away the systemic issue of believing you need to be fearless. And the thing about fear, too, that I haven't brought up, but it was in my earlier story, that fear is the intersection between each person that you might see, right? And so because we feel like we're not sure, we have uncertainty as to whether or not we should go have a conversation, some of us, I'm an extrovert introvert, so I'm not sure always should I have conversation with people because it's my own stuff I'm working out. So, fear can be that intersection between, I like to say, diversity and inclusion, diversity of all people, and whether or not we're going to, include somebody or be a part of something else. And so the more we can work on fear in our organizations, the more inclusive environments that we can have, the more we will start to recognize similarities and differences of other people around us and learn how to work with them, learn how to work with conflict more. And there is research around, the more diverse teams we have, the more likely we are starting to understand performance and get to higher performance. You don't just automatically do that with a diverse organization. You actually have to have inclusion involved. And then when you start to have situations where people are developed and supported as a result of who they are and how they're showing up, they are actually thriving and flowing in their work environments, the role that they have. And so better organizational outcomes, faster organizational outcomes. And we get to save the lives in the world. Or I always like to bring up the company Best Buy because I used to work there. And Best Buy got really smart. They realized that was important about their work was that they are changing the experiences of people's lives, right? Like they are bringing a TV into a home where there wasn't a home, or they are bringing technology into a home where there wasn't technology. And now they actually are in the health space, which is pretty cool. But every organization, I think, needs to think about how do they tie their work to the bottom to the community, rather than just the bottom line. Certainly, the bottom line is going to be impacted if the more that they are able to have outcomes. But I think the way that they can speed up their outcomes too are by being able to really increase the way that they think about their work. So I got off a little bit on a digression or a tangent, but the idea is that people making sure that they're understanding their work is important too. And the only way they're going to understand their work if you get over some of those hurdles around I'm scared to talk, or I'm scared to have the conversation or work with other people. Like I said, there's fear wrapped around that. And so getting under the hood and understanding what those fears are important so that you can increase your organizational outcomes and environment, have better cultures, higher retention rates. You know, there's 20% of a person's income that is really a cost for an organization when somebody leaves, because it costs us just about that much money to recruit somebody else. If you times it by a multitude of people that leave the organization, then you create a situation where you've got now, $500,000 that are out the door, because the average turnover can be, 20 people leaving an organization. If they have 6,000 figures, 20% of that income, and that's only 20 people that I'm talking about in a given year. You create that for a larger organization. That's a whole much more people that are leaving and cost.
Yeah.
So
it really is the gateway for so many different tremendously impactful results. This concept of redefining your relationship with fear and having more openness there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Tonya, this has been such a inspiring and insightful, and I would say liberating conversation.
Good. Thank you. And I was pleased to be here, and thank you for the opportunity, and to sit here with you was a delight.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you to our listeners. Join us next week for another episode of Leadership Matters. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Leadership Matters. If today's episode resonated with you, would you do me a favor and share it with someone you care about? To learn more about the work the Bailey Group is doing in the world, check us out at thebaileygroup.com or follow us over on LinkedIn. We love sharing useful articles, helpful resources, and valuable tools to help you expand your leadership capacity. Like and subscribe, and join us next time for more honest conversations.